Do you guys remember when I made that video about how Shojo Beat was falling off? I discussed the current state of the manga in print, which was heavily relying on nostalgia for older titles, and simultaneously how it was relegating shoujo to romance, furthering the already pervasive stereotype that even tens of videos I make can't break. I also rehashed some of the controversies that were happening with fans at the time, the lack of accessibility for Shojo Beat titles, and overall just my trepidations about where this label was going in the future. While that video came from only the utmost place of love for Shojo Beat, as I've been a fan of it since 2006, it was still quite divisive for some people. I was criticized for having been too harsh on this multi-million-dollar company. I was also told that if I openly criticized Shojo Beat, I would single-handedly cause their downfall. If I questioned their methods, I couldn't possibly help create a change of course by letting other people know how to get their voices heard. I was creating a witch hunt. Essentially, I, a small YouTuber who lives in a one-bedroom apartment, was punching down on this poor, massive company. Well, it's been a little over a year now since that video came out. In the meantime, Viz has managed to do a complete 180 with its imprint, licensing a plethora of new shoujo titles, creating an app where they're readily available to read, and even kind of engaging more with the fans online. Somehow, they managed to address most of the concerns I had in that initial video in only a year. So I figured, if I can't beat them, join them. Those criticisms about the first Shojo Beat video were right. I should be nicer to my corporate shoujo overlords because they're giving me so much to be happy about lately. I think it's finally time that I became I didn't think there would ever be a chance in hell that I would be turning around to sing Shojo Beat's praises within the last 6 months. By the end of the last video that I made on them, I was at a place of complete resignation. I was prepared to hardly ever pick up their titles in the future, and just think of days past when their series used to flood my shelves. However, the shoujo renaissance hasn't just been happening with new anime announced over the past year, because it's happening with manga too, it seems. When we had last left Shojo Beat, it had just gone through a controversy about reprints for its classic titles. Not only were their old series like Basara, Ceres, and Red River effectively out of print, they were also being price gouged by scalpers online, making it relatively impossible to own one of these series unless you sold an arm and a leg. Due to this, there was a huge accessibility problem for this label that many fans were complaining about, especially once you compare it to its shonen counterpart. So fans were reasonably asking to get the manga they wanted back in print, but instead they got a meanie answer from Shojo Beat. Well, funny enough, it wasn't until a couple months after that last video came out that Viz surprise dropped a new manga app a la Beyonce Lemonade.
There are many types of manga, and I am so proud to announce a new service to meet the needs of the broader manga community, Viz Manga.
The arrival of the Viz Manga app finally allowed people to read shoujo and josei titles for a reasonable price of $2.99. That is, if you lived in North America. Finally, you could read Basara without breaking the bank, or try out a new series like Sakura Saku without spending double the amount on something you may not even like. This app directly addressed one of my biggest issues with Shojo Beat the last time around. Zero accessibility means more piracy, more upset fans, and less ability to check out shoujo. If I were to have one little complaint about the app, it's that we don't have any Hakusensha titles available on it. This would have nothing to do with Viz though, since they can't really control what an overseas company allows them to put on the app. My gripe in this case lands more on Hakusensha's lap because they own the rights for big titles like Oku, Yona of the Dawn, and Natsume's Book of Friends. Many of the longer titles that Shojo Beat has licensed comes from this company, so it would be nice if people could read them on the app without having to shell out hundreds of dollars just to stay up to date. It would be like if you had no other option than to buy all 74 volumes of Bleach just to read it. Other than that though, the app has been an extremely welcome fix for the lack of accessibility for shoujo titles, new and old. I would have never read series like My Love Story, Sakura Hime, or Neighborhood Story without it. Nor would I get to recommend series like Sand Chronicles, Basara, or We Were There without the app having made those titles readily available. I really can't stress how much this app made accessibility for shoujo titles skyrocket. I used to think that Viz was one of the most behind manga publishers when it came to manga apps, and now they are leading the charge. What has really taken the Shojo Beat label to the next step is their last 6 months of licensing acquisitions and announcements. In the past, most of their announcements were kind of a snooze fest. They were really only announcing 1 or 2 manga every round, and each time they were like 10-year-old romance high school series that most people had already read or known of because of their anime or other means. Rather than being excited, I was becoming more apathetic by the announcement with nothing that really wowed me. Granted, I did have 1 or 2 licensing wins before 2024 started. The first of which being Timon's B-Side by Yuki Shiawasu, who was the creator of Takane and Hana. While it was a predictable pickup for Shojo Beat, as they had already had this author in their catalog, it was unpredictable from the fact that Timon's B-Side comes from Hanato Yume. This is a shoujo magazine that is most known for titles like Yona or Skip Beat. However, we have not gotten a new title from them from Shojo Beat since Anonymous Noise was licensed in 2017, making Timon's B-Side the first Hanato Yume title licensed by them in 7 years, which we now know is probably because Timon's B-Side just got announced for an anime adaptation. The other personal licensing win for me was Let's Do It Already by Aki Kusaka. While this one is another high school romance series, it's still exciting for a couple of reasons. The first reason being that this is Kusaka's debut in the English market. Shojo Beat and Viz by proxy don't often license from new authors unless they have an anime or previous popularity, since they usually play it safe with their marketing. So to get a series that came out in 2019 in Japan from a relatively new author is pretty cool. The reason this is even cooler is because we hardly ever get series from Margaret Magazine, which is where Let's Do It Already comes from. I don't know how this is, considering it's one of the oldest shoujo publishers in Japan, with 2 of the most notable series ever, Boys Over Flowers and Rose of Versailles. Timon's B-Side and Let's Do It Already were 2 series that I was very interested in and wanted to see come out in English. However, they were still only one of 2 Shojo Beat licenses that came out in their respective announcements, meaning I still wasn't entirely blown away by the publisher. 1 title every 4 months is not going to win me over when they've already been on my bad side for so long by now. If they wanted me to kneel at their feet, they had to pull out all the stops. When I went into the first licensing announcement from Viz in February of 2024, I was not expecting much, if anything at all. My hopes were repeatedly shattered by not really getting anything that excited me, so I was mostly going to see how sad I'd end up being, perpetually watching everyone around me jump for joy while I sulked in the corner like the loser shoujo fan I am. But 2024 was a new year. Of the first shoujo series announced in that round, we got Otaku Vampire's Love Bite by Julieta Suzuki, the author that is most known for her famous work Kami-sama Kiss. This was a brand new fantasy supernatural romance title with only 3 volumes out in Japan, and plus it's another series that came from Hanato Yume. Once again, while it is a semi-predictable title because it came from an already established Shojo Beat author, it was still highly unpredictable in how quickly this license got picked up. As remember, the previous issue we had with Shojo Beat was that they were about 10 years behind on licensing shoujo series. A surprise to be sure.
But a welcome one.
The showstopper came next though, the shoujo license to end all shoujo licenses. The manga announcement that single-handedly restored my faith in Viz and Shojo Beat as manga publishers. They announced Colette Decides to Die by Ulto Yukimura, a shoujo series that I have been begging for almost 4 years now, and is one of my favorite shoujo series ever. This was both an insane shock because, first of all, I never thought it would get licensed, and second of all, I never thought it would get licensed by Viz. My money was on Yen Press if we were ever to get it. They rarely license fantasy manga for Shojo Beat anymore, and when they do, they're usually only a couple of volumes long. So to pick up a 20+ fantasy manga from an author that had never been published in English before, and immediately put it to a fancy 2-in-1 omnibus format is unprecedented. The only example of this we had prior is Neighborhood Story, but that came from Ayazawa. I will say, I do have my suspicions about why this happened. Viz does not take risks like this unless they have absolute faith that this series will sell because of previous sales information, like if it already came out in digital, popularity that precedes it, or an anime adaptation. It's yet to be seen as for which reason this pans out to be, but since Colette Decides to Die was never published digitally first, and the author never had a previous series come out in English, you can kind of make an educated guess on which it might be. That is unless Viz just couldn't ignore us fans for once and decided to throw us a bone. I mean, I did kind of shout out Colette Decides to Die in the last Shojo Beat video and said that if you want that series, you should go buy their other fantasy manga, so maybe. With Colette having been licensed, I was basically just content with having got something that I was frothing at the mouth for once. But somehow, Viz and Shojo Beat were not done with us yet. They had another banger waiting for us around the corner. This time, one that was so out of left field that if you had told me last year when I made that last Shojo Beat video that it was going to come out in English, I would have thought you were straight up making fun of me. We got an announcement for a 3-in-1 re-release of Red River. The reason this is crazy, you ask? Well, it's because Red River was literally the reason for why we had the controversies on the Shojo Beat socials last time we talked about this. The original discussion around reprints for older titles was literally because someone specifically asked the Shojo Beat editor whether Red River would ever get reprints. To which the editor basically responded that it could happen, but then they referenced that old meanie post, which started the whole shitstorm for a few days. It's actually insane to me to think that either A, that whole time they were working on a re-release when that shitstorm was happening, or B, they started working on a re-release because of the shitstorm. Whatever the case, a classic title like Red River coming back in print after having been lost to time is a huge win for shoujo fans. It really doesn't matter whether you like this series or not, because the implication is that if this one does well, we could get reprints for other classic titles. This means that we could potentially get a re-release for series like Basara, Please Save My Earth, or From Far Away within the coming years. All series that are insanely expensive to own in full unless you were blessed by the manga gods, or you just found someone online who was willing to not scam you for once. February announcements wrapped up, most shoujo fans kind of assumed that would be our peak. We got one good round of licenses with 5 announcements in total, including the 3 I already mentioned, plus Last Quarter by Ayazawa and a brand spanking new Vampire Knight box set. For once, we were living large, but we knew not to aim too high. For Icarus should only be a character that is in Colette Decides to Die, and nothing more. But once again, Viz wasn't done with us. The last major thing to have happened before this video was filmed came from Viz's June announcements in 2024. While once again, I was not expecting them to give us many announcements because they went all out last time around, those bastards did it again. Another round and another 4 titles were announced for the Shojo Beat label, 2 of which were extremely interesting choices that I was actually surprised were put in the Shojo Beat imprint. One of the complaints I've had with Shojo Beat for a while now has been how they put most of their more mature or violent shoujo titles in other imprints. This would be the case with a series like Oku or Children of the Whales, which are both shoujo titles, but they added them to the signature line. One of the more egregious cases of this was with Requiem of the Rose King, which they didn't even put in any specific imprint. They just slapped the Viz Media logo on it and called it a day instead of putting this shoujo title under Shojo Beat. I also just find it weird that it's not under Shojo Beat, considering the fact that Shojo Beat is often the one to promote it and post anything about it on their socials. So imagine my surprise when the bloody assassin romance manga Firefly Wedding by Areiko Tachibana ends up going into the Shojo Beat imprint. This series is one of those cases where it technically doesn't have an official demographic label because it's published in a web app. However, it has still been consistently placed in the women's manga category for either rankings or awards, ultimately making this a toss-up of whether this series was going to land in the Shojo Beat label or not. So imagine my surprise when it did, since this manga can get very bloody and risque at times. Which gives me a bit of hope that Shojo Beat is actually listening to its fans and isn't trying to just pigeonhole Shojo Beat as a label as just romance titles. The second title that we got, which was completely out of left field once again, was a Josei GL series called Pink Candy Kiss by Ami Uozumi. This manga comes from the magazine Kokohana, which has never had a series licensed by Viz before. In fact, the only series licensed by this Josei publisher have been from Seven Seas, which picked up Blank Canvas and Shirakuma Cafe. Which, honestly, it's pretty strange that we don't have many series from this publisher, considering many older popular Shojo Beat mangaka, like the author of Lovely Complex, have moved to Kokohana. But I digress. It's pretty cool to see a Josei title getting picked up and put in the Shojo Beat label, since it really doesn't happen very often. And usually when it does, it's mostly just a smut series, which, no shame if you like that, but many of the ones that they picked are kind of just trashy. Anyway, it's also the fact that this series is a GL manga. I was fully not expecting a GL series to make the cut, even if a recent title like My Love Mix-Up, which is a BL from the same publisher, got put in that imprint. We have had queer-themed Shojo Beat titles before, don't get me wrong. Most were BL adjacent though, like Bloody Mary or Banana Fish. So we had never really gotten a GL title under the Shojo Beat imprint. Until now, making the decision to put Pink Candy Kiss under the Shojo Beat imprint a huge win for Sapphics and just very cool in general. To be honest, there are still things I would love to see Shojo Beat do. I wish more classic titles from the 70s and 80s could get licensed, like Sukaban Deka, or that they wouldn't be so scared of non-romance shoujo manga like those from Mystery Bonita. We could still use more promotional push for series on their socials even. Although that kind of goes for most publishers, as they pawn off most of their promotional jobs to consumers and fans as if it's their duty. Not everything is perfect now, and of course I'll still have my gripes every now and then. Still though, it has been an incredible comeback for both Viz and Shojo Beat. Whether this was intentional or not, Since the last video, they have seemed determined to win the Shojo fans back. Between the app and the licensing announcements from the last months, well, you're not gonna hear me complaining about Shojo Beat for a little while. They have basically addressed and fixed most of the issues that I've had with this label in the past year. Or, at the very least, they're slowly digging themselves out of the hole that they made. Viz and Shojo Beat has been the publisher I've known the longest and has been with me through childhood, so of course they're going to be the ones that I have the highest hope for. I want Shojo Beat to do well. I said that in the last video too. I'm not trying to do hit pieces on them. I'm not trying to wish on their downfall. If they do good, I want them to know that they're doing good. When I made that last video complaining about them, it truly did come from a place of wanting a company to manage something that I love better. And they have been. So I want to kind of reward them. I hope this video is indication enough that Shojo Beat has won me back. Which is why oh, food's ready. And that, my hojos, is the perfect way to cook a boot. Happy licking. It's a little tough. I'm just kidding, I won't be touching this. I ruined a lot of my cooking equipment for the bit though.